H7N9 bird flu spreads to the capital. John Kerry in China to discuss North Korean crisis and a near air disaster in Bali.
Good evening. Beijing has reported its first case of H7N9 bird flu, which is also the first case found outside of eastern China. A 7-year-old girl is said to be recovering in hospital now. So far, 47 people have contracted the virus across the border, of which 11 cases were fatal. Diane To has our top story.
This 7-year-old girl is the capital city's first H7N9 case. She was admitted to Beijing's Ditan Hospital on Thursday. At a news conference, the hospital's deputy director said he was happy to announce that the girl was recovering from a high fever and that she was able to eat small amounts of food. The girl lives in the rural outskirts of Beijing, where her parents work in the live poultry trade. Neither parent has shown any signs of the flu so far. Beijing authorities are trying to locate the source of her infection and have suspended all live poultry sales in the capital, as well as other bird-related activities such as pigeon flying. It also said it had culled all 500 or so poultry in the girl's village. Although the H7N9 strain has now spread beyond the country's eastern provinces, mainland authorities maintain there is no need for panic because all signs still indicate the virus is transmitted directly from birds and that there's no human-to-human transmission. The World Health Organization said China has been cooperative in sharing information, which is key to controlling the spread of infection.
The information released to us has been on a daily basis. We've been getting information as the government receives it. But it's been flowing, I think, smoothly, and we've been able to receive the information promptly.
Here in Hong Kong, microbiologist Ho Pak Leung suggested the best way of preventing the virus spreading to Hong Kong is to ban the sale of live poultry in local markets. The Chief Secretary for Administration, Carrie Lam, maintained there is no need for such a move, at least for the time being. The government earlier announced it would suspend the live poultry trade if the city reports its first human case of H7N9. Diane To, TVB News.
Striking dock workers at the Kwai Chung container terminal warned they may step up their campaign in the coming week. No date has been set for the next round of talks. Several meetings between the workers and their employees, that is, the workers and their employers this week, failed to resolve the dispute, now in its third week. Striking dock workers criticized the contractors for not showing sincerity in those talks. They have now threatened to step up the industrial action if their employers continue to disregard their concerns. The new Standard Working Hours Committee will make its recommendations to the chief executive in 3 years' time. With debate raging over the issue, it could take a lot of hard work and effort before members can reach a compromise. Diane To has more.
The newly formed committee will meet early next month to try to come up with recommendations for Hong Kong's workforce. A member representing employees has suggested setting standard working hours at 44 hours a week, and any overtime work should see workers get 1.5 hours of compensation pay per hour. Ng Chao Pei believes the committee should set a preliminary formula and then negotiate the details based on that. He said otherwise it might be a waste of 3 years. But members from the business side have reservations about his suggestion. Ho Sai Chu said as the number of people who would be affected by standard working hours may total 1 million or 2, the committee really needs to consider the options carefully. And we often think, do we really need to legislate everything? With Hong Kong having one of the biggest wealth gaps in the developed world, fiercely opposing ideas are bound to come into the discussion. Secretary for Labour and Welfare Matthew Cheung insists the committee has enough time to find a solution that works. 3 years is a reasonable amount of time for society to discuss the issue and to conduct further research and analysis. Cheung called on the public not to be sceptical or lose faith even before the committee meets. He said the most important thing is to have broad discussion across sectors so that a middle ground consensus can be reached. Diane To, TVB News.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met President Xi Jinping and other mainland leaders in Beijing today to urge the Chinese side to use its influence to rein in North Korea. Kerry's 4-day trip to the region comes amid speculation that Pyongyang is preparing for a missile launch. Tony Sabine reports.
John Kerry's next stop on his whirlwind tour of Northeast Asia took him to China, where he met with top state leaders, including President Xi Jinping. Weeks of tensions over North Korea dominated the agenda between the president and the U.S. Secretary of State. Kerry also met with Premier Li Keqiang, State Councillor Yang Jiechi, as well as his counterpart Wang Yi, as he tries to get Beijing to take a more active role in getting Pyongyang to calm down. As North Korea's main ally, China has some influence, and recent signs suggest Beijing is losing patience. Last weekend, President Xi made a speech at the Boao Forum in which he talked about regional peace and stability. Although he didn't mention the North by name, it was widely interpreted as a rebuke to its belligerent behavior. Kerry has also been reassuring America's allies, such as South Korea and Japan, that the U.S. will not tolerate any nonsense from Pyongyang, including another round of missile tests. South Korean and Japanese forces have been on high alert ever since North Korea threatened war with Washington and its allies. Today, Japan's defense and foreign ministers visited one of several missile defense sites in Tokyo, which were set up just in case. Worries about Pyongyang's offensive capabilities were stoked further when a U.S. intelligence agency reported it was moderately confident North Korea could launch a nuclear-armed missile. But the White House was quick to play down such a threat.
North Koreans have tested nuclear weapons, and they have developed some missile technology. What they have not done is demonstrate a capacity to, a capability to deploy a nuclear-armed missile, attach a warhead to a missile and fire it.
And Kerry warned in Seoul last night that any North Korean missile test would be extremely unhelpful.
And it will be a provocative and unwanted act that will raise people's temperature with respect to this issue.
Tony Sabine, TVB News.
More than 100 passengers and crew aboard a Lion Air Boeing 737 had a lucky escape as it overshot the runway on the Indonesian resort island of Bali. The plane ended up in shallow water by the runway. Despite the damage to the jet, everyone inside managed to get out and reach shore. Local officials and paramedics said more than 20 people were taken to the hospital with head injuries and broken bones. The plane was en route from Bandung, the capital of West Java province, to Bali when the incident occurred.
A strong earthquake rocked western Japan today, injuring at least 23 people. The magnitude 6.3 quake hit an area near the city of Kobe. 7 were seriously hurt, most of them elderly people who tripped while trying to flee. Left some homes with rooftop tiles broken and cracked walls. Today's quake hit an area where a magnitude 7.2 tremor killed more than 6,400 people in 1995. The retrial of former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak has been thrown into confusion after the judge recused himself from the proceedings. He referred the case to an appeals court, saying he felt unease in reviewing it. Mubarak was being retried for alleged complicity in the killing of protesters during the 2011 revolt that ousted him. Before his court appearance today, the 84-year-old former leader had not been seen in public since his initial conviction in June last year. His retrial was granted by an appeals court that overturned his life sentence in January, citing shoddy procedures.
One day after the U.S. Treasury Department brought sanctions against 18 Russians accused of human rights violations, Moscow lashed back, doing the same. Russia says Washington's move dealt a big blow to bilateral relations, but the White House has defended its way of punishing alleged human rights abusers.
The 2009 death of lawyer Sergei Magnitsky in pretrial detention in Moscow was a tragedy, and the investigation into his death has yielded no visible result.
The death of the Russian lawyer was the impetus for sanctioning those responsible. Sergei Magnitsky was arrested in 2008 for tax evasion after he accused Russian police of stealing $230 million in tax rebates. He died in prison a year later after allegedly being beaten and denied medical treatment. It was a tragedy Washington said it could not turn a blind eye to.
And we will use the tools in the Magnitsky Act and other available legal authorities to ensure that persons responsible for the maltreatment and death of Mr. Magnitsky are barred from traveling to the United States and doing business here.
Sanctioning those responsible for Magnitsky's death, along with 2 other alleged human rights abusers, drew immediate anger from Russia. The foreign ministry in Moscow called the sanctions a strong blow to bilateral relations and joint trust. So in direct retaliation, Moscow published its own list of 18 Americans now banned from entering Russia. A move this Russian lawmaker said is just cause for the Americans interfering with its internal affairs.
This is bad news because basically nobody will like it in Moscow, and we think that it is an infringement on Russian sovereignty.
But knowing the list originally targeted more than 250 Russians means the White House showed some restraint.
It shows that the Obama administration wants to conserve some partnership with Moscow instead of getting involved in some kind of political warfare.
More names considered for the Magnitsky list are scheduled to be sent to Congress this Friday in a move that could further aggravate U.S.-Russia relations.
And when we come back, the police chief speaks out over Occupy Central campaign. What a day at the Masters.